Our thoughts before worship this morning contain an excerpt from the poem On the Pulse of the Morning by Maya Angelou. I would encourage you sometime this week to go to YouTube and find a clip of her reading that poem in its entirety. You will be blessed by its words. Hear these words now. There is a true yearning to respond to the singing river and the wise rock. So say to the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African and Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheik, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher, they all hear the speaking of the tree. Today, the first and last of every tree speaks to humankind. Come to me, here beside the river. Maya Angelou's poem echoes our passage today, the one which Chase read for us from Revelation 22. As we prepare for the word preached, would you join with me your hearts and minds in prayer? O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. $249. Last night when I went to bed, there had been 249 mass shootings in the United States of America in the 215 days of 2019 thus far. And when we woke up this morning, that number was already out of date, because around 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, a mass shooting happened at a bar in Dayton, Ohio, leaving 9 dead and 26 injured at last count. There have been 250 mass shootings in the United States this year. 250. It's important to note about the injured in El Paso that authorities in that immigrant-friendly town believe that in addition to the dozens being treated for injuries, there are more who have not sought medical treatment due to their immigration status. People are afraid. For many reasons, people are afraid. This is the country we live in. It is terribly broken, and it has been since its beginning. That's part of why it's so broken now. We've inherited this legacy. And we live in a time when Christian nationalism and white supremacy are on the rise, and many who are ignorant and afraid have been convinced to put all their faith in the golden calf of a gun. Our country is terribly broken. And friends, it is up to us to mend it. No one else can do that. No one else can swoop in or will swoop in to save us. We must do this. We are called to heal this country of its awful, gaping, historic, and fresh wounds by virtue of being born in this age and following in the way of Jesus. We are called to do that. And we are all sad, sadder than I ever thought I could be. And we are all angry, angrier than I ever thought I could be. And we are all afraid. I am very afraid. And yet, And yet, we must allow that anger and sadness and fear to be transformed into fuel for this journey ahead of us. We must have hope, even when hope seems hopeless. Oh, remember the ancient stories, that in hopeless situations, the angels always show up and they begin with, "Don't be afraid." There's a lot to be afraid of. And remember, too, that hope has two beautiful daughters, Augustine of Hippo said, and their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. In times like these, when the sway of ignorance and fear and violence seems to be taking hold, as all the while we are holding immense grief in the face of senseless violence and immense grief over this beautiful world being defiled by such violence, in times like these, the words of the hymn, "Won't you let me be your servant," always rise in my head. And as those words rise, I am lifted out of complacency, the complacency that is often brought on by mass tragedy, especially when it happens with such frequency. And then with this reminder, we can practice our purpose once again. The words, you just sang them, go, "I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through." Today and tomorrow and in the coming weeks and months, we must weep with those who are weeping, and yet we must not let sorrow and despair eclipse the light that we are called to shine. The song continues, "I will hold the Christ light for you in the shadow of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear." When I was awake at 3 a.m, awake with despair over this broken world, I suddenly noticed a different thing. There was live feed, a video of live feed taken earlier from hundreds of mothers from Moms Demand Action who had flooded the streets and marched to shine lights from their phones at the White House. And among those in D.C. is Erin Ewald. She sits here in our pews often. We have many activists in our congregation, and they do good work. And to be honest, I cannot imagine that our current president would wake up and look out his window and see that sea of tiny lights outside of his window and that his heart would be changed. I can't actually imagine that that will happen. But Jesus got up from the dead, so maybe it will. But like Pharaoh before him, his heart is hardened, as are the hearts of many lawmakers in our country. And who knows how many plagues it will take before their hearts are changed. But all those tiny little lights shining in the night, they'll change somebody's heart. Some parent or lawmaker or some NRA supporter somewhere this morning, they've had their heart changed. I'd bet money on that. The loss of life is too great. I thought about all of these moms standing outside the White House, shining their tiny lights in the darkness, and remembered that we must not let sorrow nor despair, nor our own anger, nor indifference eclipse the light that we are called to shine. We must not let our own anger with those who perpetuate violence with racist, nationalistic, and xenophobic laced words eclipse the light of Christ, which we are called to shine, the light which illumines nonviolent, persistent, right relation-building, restorative love. Always remember Always remember this about the love of Jesus. It's not a passive, anything goes kind of thing, but a fierce love that insists on abundant life for all. Remember that Jesus lived in a time of great violence. Violence perpetuated by systems that concretized biased structures of race and class, gender and nationality, which afforded those in higher ranking classes the right to abuse and even murder people ranking below them. Remember that Jesus preached against these systems of violence. Remember that Jesus worked against these systems of violence. Remember that Jesus interrupted these systems of violence. And remember, it was that work that got him killed. But remember, more importantly, that death does not get the last word. We are Easter people. Christ is risen, and in every death we rise too. From every moment of death dealing in this country, God raises us too. God raises us to weep with those who are weeping and to shine the light in the shadows. Throughout time, when violence has reigned, people have dreamed of another way of being. It's true now, and it was true when somebody named John wrote down the contents of a dream that he had around 64 CE while he lived under the rule of Nero, a rule that prompted and perpetuated violence. But in that dream, the violent Nero is not on the throne. God is. A new creation entirely is arriving, and a voice is heard saying, see, the home of God is among you. God will live with people. They'll be God's people, and God will be with them. Every tear will be wiped from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. Those ancient people who knew so much death, who endured so much violence, had this vision of how the world could be to hold on to. It gave them hope. God is with them. And all the pain that this world dishes out, all the pain we heap upon one another, it is gone. It is abolished. Death and mourning and crying and pain are no more. That vision continues. Then the angel showed me a river of water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And through the middle of the city, right down the middle of the street. And on either side of this river is the tree of life with 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree, those leaves are for the healing of the nations. Do you notice? Do you see what happens in this vision of a different way of being? The tree of life, it's not on one side or the other. The tree is on both sides of the river. And it's fruitful and it's abundant and it's made for healing. So when the shock of last night wears off, and it will, and it won't take long, and people are back to taking sides, when that happens, you, people of God, remember this, that the tree of life grows on both sides of the river. On both sides. What side are you on? Be on the side of healing. It's the only side that there is. We live in a broken place. This is a country which is so broken. It's terribly broken. It's been broken since its beginning. And that's why it's so broken now. We live in a time when white nationalism, Christian nationalism, and white supremacy are on the rise, and many who are ignorant and afraid have been convinced to put all their faith in the golden calf of a gun. I say it again because it bears repeating. Our country is terribly broken, and it's up to us to mend it because no one else will do that. No one else will swoop in to save us. We must see, look, see. Emmanuel, God with us. The wounded and broken healer is with us. And while earthly rulers may be in charge, God is on the throne. And see, God has planted the tree of life on both sides so that everybody gets healed. Remember, we are called by virtue of being born in this time and place as followers in the way of Jesus to help heal this country of its awful, gaping, historic, and fresh wounds. So when the shock of last night wears off and people are back to taking sides, people of God, be on the side of healing, because that's where God has planted us. Amen.